very special guest. He is a colleague that I have worked with for, how many years did we?
I've lost track.
We've been on a committee together for a long time. So Dick Stevie is our presenter today, and he joined Integral Analytics as Vice President of Forecasting in June of 2012. But prior to that, Dick was the Chief Economist for Duke Energy, with over 30 years of experience in forecasting and market analytics in the utility industries. And so he is here today to present to us on the state of the economy and give us a little bit of a forecast on what we can expect following this first quarter where we are right now. So,
all right.
Anyway, thanks, Dick.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. I take back all those things I said about you. As I was thinking about what to say today, I was thinking that, well, maybe the title of this should be The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You know, the good is housing and autos. The bad is Washington. And the ugly is this guy, if you can see it, that's Putin. Is on the cover of The Economist. So, but I didn't do that, so Nancy's going to be my button pusher. So today I'm going to talk something about the national outlook, make some comments about the local outlook. But first I really need to mention something else about the economy. They make movies about all kinds of things. And lately there's been a resurgence in interest in movies about zombies, of all things. And you may ask, why do I bring this up? Well, if you think about it, in 2007, the economy went into a hole. It was basically a very sick economy. You might say it was on life support and apparently dead on arrival. And since then, there have been a number of things that have been done to try to revive the economy, such as TARP and ARRA and what have you, quantitative easing. So up till now, the economy has not really shown much life. It is starting to show some more, but it's really kind of struggled. And it's really been not really alive, but kind of undead, hence the term zombie economy. So if you click again, so what you've got here is a picture of, a zombie movie. And if you hit it again, that's my definition of the zombie economy. But it could be worse. You could have a zombie economist. I've been called a vampire economist. It sucks the life out of the economy, but I thought this was appropriate given the situation. So let's get started. And go ahead. So I'm going to go through some indicators, and I hope you all can see this, is that, as I said, housing and autos have really laid the foundation for the strength of the economy, and where we're seeing an acceleration of growth. GDP growth was 1.9% in 2013. You can see from the numbers up here, the housing and vehicle sales are up very, very strongly. And businesses are really holding a lot of cash on the sidelines. They've just been uncertain what to do with it. And that's one of the issues that I want to talk about, is just where are we going to go? The business uncertainty is still an issue for businesses. At the same time, the unemployment rate has improved, but there's an issue with this that I'm going to talk about a little bit. The national measure of unemployment, 6.7% March of this year. But there's this other measure that I'll talk about a little bit that's at 12.7%. So I've got a number of charts. This one is just showing where we've gone over this recession. This first column of numbers shows how much things dropped. So, for example, GDP dropped 4.3% during this recession. Industrial production, retail sales, employment. Look at manufacturing employment. And look at housing starts, down 79% from where it was to the trough. Vehicle sales, almost 50%. But since then, we've seen some nice increases, but at the same time, only GDP, industrial production, and retail sales have exceeded how high we were before this recession. Employment is still behind. Housing and vehicle sales are also still behind, even though we've had such a strong increase. Now, economists like graphs, so bear with me. What I'm going to do is run through some indicators. And this first one tells you something about the consumer. So I'm going to go through some graphs on the consumer, and this is percent of household debt, percent of disposable income that's devoted towards debt service. So this would be principal and interest payments. And you can see that back in the height of the recession, that number was up above 13%, and now it's down below 10. Yes?
Does that include mortgages?
Yes. This is across the country. So these are kind of national figures, and everybody's particular situation would be a lot different, obviously, but it's now below anything in the history. This goes back to 1980, this chart. What that tells me is that, as a whole, consumers have done a good job of getting their balance sheet back where it needs to be. You know, they've kind of got things sorted out and have things back in balance. If we go to the next one, this is retail sales. This is a little economic side point, is that this is nominal sales. This has not been reduced for inflation. But you can see how, what I like to do is look at total retail sales and then take out what's spent on gasoline. Because the gasoline prices was a big part of the impact for why we had the recession back in 07 and 08. And if you look at retail sales net of gas, that has been one of the things that had been kind of sucking the life out of the growth in the economy, because of the consumer spending that would have to go to cover, you know, what you're putting in your car for gasoline. But lately, that's kind of evened out. Now, you see this little dip out here at the end? Anybody know what's causing that?
Weather?
You got it. That's a weather effect. So I expect that even though this is kind of dipped lately, I would expect that to rebound pretty soon.
Does retail sales, does that include like dinner out and things
Oh,
like
yeah.
that? Okay.
That's an interesting thing. I always, during the middle of the recession, I was looking at just that factor to see what's being spent on restaurants, and you could see a sharp drop in that, but that's come back. Now, you can tell by how easy is it to get into a restaurant on a weekend. If it's difficult, the economy's doing better. Okay. I started looking at credit because of something a friend of mine at Macy's does their forecasting was commenting on, is that the revolving credit, though, and this is your credit cards, has been relatively flat. Total credit, which includes what's going on with mortgages, has been climbing, but people are not using credit cards the way they did in the past. I think that's probably a good thing, so that we don't end up overextending ourselves, but there's no real significant push by the consumer to spend more right now. They're just kind of managing where they are. You know, they're being cautious and really don't want to take on more risk, and I think that makes sense. Vehicle sales, I mentioned how strong this is up. Here's the weather dip again, the last few months. We're getting close to the 17 million mark. I'll point this out. Anybody remember what happened here?
Cash for clunkers.
Cash for clunkers. Had absolutely no impact. It was in and out, and that was it. Let's go on to this one. Housing. This is a chart, goes back to 1959, shows housing starts, and you can see the volatility in this. And back in here, I always used to say if it ever got below 1 million again, we were going to have a recession. So back in here, I said, oh, looks like we're going to have a recession because it's headed towards 1 million. Never did I think it would get below 500,000. We're just back now too close to the 1 million mark. We're still got a long way that we could go in terms of housing. And if this takes off, that's when you're going to see this economy really heat up. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. This is another way of looking at housing, is what's the inventory of new homes for sale. This is the months of inventory. And during the height of a recession, we were up over a 12-month supply of houses that were available for sale, new houses. We're back near the 4-month level, which kind of backed up here a little bit, I think, again, due to the weather, which is where you would normally expect that the inventory would be. So again, what this points to me is that, and I think you're starting to see this, is a significant increase in construction for single-family and apartments. Side point here, there's an index of housing prices, the Case-Shiller Housing Price Index. So that red line is the national one. And you can see, I need to set this up a little bit. Typically, you would expect housing prices to follow kind of overall the rate of inflation. So this black line is inflation. You can see how the national and regional prices of houses kind of followed that for a long, long time. Here we have the acceleration in housing prices, driven in part by exotic mortgages and just a real price bubble developed, cheap debt and exotic mortgages. And greed, I'll throw that in. The Midwest really didn't see much of that acceleration in prices. And still, okay, you have the bust, prices come down. We're still below what you would expect in terms of a normal rate of increase in the price of houses. Nationally, though, lately this thing has started to spike up a bit. So there's a lot of regional differences in the housing markets and the pressure on prices. And I'm kind of surprised at that pickup there in those national housing prices. So this is something to watch, because that could slow down this housing market. All right. This is important. This is business investment. And what business investment represents is new businesses, businesses expanding. This is, it could be increases in inventory, but generally it's things like, somebody opens up a new business or they're expanding a plant. And I think the most important thing of it is that the linkage of this to employment is what's critical. If we go to the next chart, what you see here, and this is a little complicated, and I hate the colors, but I couldn't get it to work any differently. These kind of ugly, what is that, light blue is the change in investment. The darker color here is the change in employment. The linkage here between spending on investment and employment growth is dramatic. It's not the government that creates jobs, is my point. It's business investment. The correlation here is just astounding. And to me, this is things that can be done policy-wise that encourage investment is where you're going to get the growth in jobs. All right, I want to move to employment now. And what this represents, this red line, is signifies for the first claims for unemployment insurance. So somebody's laid off, they seek unemployment insurance, and typically when you're below 400,000, that means that the economy is improving, employment is growing. That thing spiked near the 700,000 mark back in the height of the recession. Currently, we're headed towards 300,000, and that's good for employment. That would signify, as a leading indicator of an improvement in the employment sector. And if you notice the employment figures that came out in March, or in April for March, they just came out last week, we had a pretty good report on that, a lot of growth in jobs in March, which is consistent with what this was saying. And if we go on, this shows for the last 3.5 years, this is the percent change in employment, that for some time now we've had positive growth in employment. With all the way the media talks, you would think there hasn't been any growth, but there's been some significant growth in jobs over this time frame. The manufacturing sector, same type of chart. The black bars show positive growth in manufacturing employment. And if you look at, the recession was a dramatic drop in manufacturing employment, and it's come back a little bit. At the same time, I think there's a couple things going on here. One is a return of jobs from China and Asia, because one of the things that's kind of surprising is energy is cheaper in this country than in China. So more energy-intensive businesses are moving back to the U.S. because of cheap natural gas and cheaper electricity. In fact, there's some textile jobs returning to the Carolinas because of this. And there's other industries as well where we're seeing not resourcing, but a revival of manufacturing in this country. At the same time, though, this may not mean more jobs. I'm sure you've heard about the impact of productivity growth and technological change. Manufacturing employment has been going away for a long time, and you may have heard the old adage about the manufacturing plant of the future is going to be operated by a man and a dog. The man will be there to feed the dog. The dog's there to keep the man from touching anything, because everything's going to be robotic or just operated independently. And as a result, I created a chart that you can't read, but what I was just talking about has to do with education and a focus on education. But this is really kind of the real story here of this economy. A year ago, the U3 unemployment rate, the official unemployment rate, was 6.8%. Last month it was 6.7%. Not much change, although we've had a lot of job growth. At the same time, there's this U6. A year ago it was 12.8, now it's 12.7. Well, what the heck is the U6? I'll have to read this to you because it's a little complicated. Is that it's the total unemployed plus all persons marginally attached to the labor force. This is your government at work with all these definitions. What does that mean? Marginally attached to the labor force are those that are neither working nor looking for work but indicate they want and are available for a job and have looked for work sometime in the past 12 months. It also includes discouraged workers, a subset of the marginally attached, who have given a job market-related reason for not looking, and part-time workers who want and are available for full-time but have had to settle for a part-time schedule. So when people talk about the marginally attached to the unemployment rate, that's what they're talking about. People who are discouraged or want full-time but are working part-time. And it's almost twice as high as a percentage. And this number was closer to 17 and 18% at the height of the recession. But I want to go further, if you can. This is just a summary of some unemployment rates. First thing I want to point out is age 16 to 19. Over 20% unemployment. At the same time, construction currently at 11.3%, and leisure and hospitality 10.2%. The thing about construction is, I think that's going to improve when you see the resurgence in the housing market. We're going to put some of those construction workers back to work. You'd think they'd already be back to work given the construction on I-75 and elsewhere around here, but we've got a long way to go. The ages 16 to 19 versus age 55 and over at 4.7 says something about education that I think is important, is that, this is a segment of the population that really deserves, I think, some attention to try to get that part of the workforce back to work. So we go on. And this is showing exactly what happened to employment from the height, or from the peak before the recession. We were at 138 million jobs. We lost 8.7. We've returned to 8.2. So right now, to get back to where we were, not to where we should be, but to where we were, there's 437,000 jobs short. There's over 2 million in manufacturing and 1.8 million almost in construction. So if the construction were to just get back to where it was, we'd be above our pre-recession peak for employment. Still a far cry from where we would expect to be at this point in time, but some improvement. And here is just something I found interesting on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website that shows the value of education and improvement in the unemployment rate. If you have less than a high school diploma, you've got 11% unemployment rate. This is for the year 2013. If you got a college degree or better, 4, 3.4, 2.3, 2.2% unemployment. Quite a bit of difference. And the income levels are dramatically different as well. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, and don't intend to, but I think it's kind of interesting to look at the data to see how important education is. I want to say something about immigration as well, if we can go back one, is that we bring a lot of people from outside the U.S. into the U.S. to the universities to educate them. We train them, and then because of our immigration policies, we force them out. And at the same time, we've probably kind of ticked them off. All we're doing is creating our competition. We're doing a great job of that. And this is where, again, I think it would make sense to have some focus on immigration reform, especially for the people that have master's degrees or college degrees and above. If you've got that level of education, we ought to be doing things to try to keep them here so that they become taxpayers and this is where you get entrepreneurs that are going to create new jobs and new businesses in this country, which would help, I think everybody. So I'm done preaching with that. We can go on. Let's turn to the manufacturing sector. This is the Institute for Supply Management, the ISM index. It's highly volatile, and major drop during this recession. As long as it's above that 50 black line, the manufacturing sector is improving. And that's where we are. This is one of my favorite charts, is industrial production. And at the bottom of the business cycle, this is back in June of '09. Since then, we've been following the increase of an average business cycle. For a while, I thought we were going to follow the 73-75 cycle, back from the Arab oil embargo days, but we're following an average cycle. So industry is doing well during this business cycle. It may not be adding tons of jobs, but production is doing well. And now we can talk about the government. I didn't say anything about that picture up there. That's really from the Vatican. I got to visit that last year. And that is supposed to represent the world in chaos. So I thought this was appropriate here. But right now, monetary policy is very supportive of growth. The new head of the Fed is Janet Yellen. And so far, so good. I have a great deal of respect for her, as I did for Ben Bernanke. I'll say that if we were very fortunate to have him in office at the time when all this fell apart, because he knew what to do. The federal funds rate is near zero. We are printing money and buying bonds, but this tapering of quantitative easing is beginning, and you're seeing some of the effects of that. But they seem to be doing it at a slow, gradual pace, which is what's needed here. Fiscal policy is expansionary. The federal deficit has become a bit smaller. It's running about 0.6 trillion. And the debt level does need to be addressed. If we go to the next chart. I don't know if you can see this. This is a picture of Mesa Verde, the cliff dwellers. And I was thinking, if government doesn't kind of get its act together, you can hit it again, I'm going to be the one kind of jumping off the cliff here because it's driving me crazy. But let's go on. What has happened over the past few years is that government dysfunction has raised business uncertainty. I mean, you just can't run things the way we've been running them with divisive partisan politics when we need solutions on all these different things. I'm not trying to argue one side versus the other. I'm just saying, let's get our act together because we look foolish to the rest of the world. Here's a snapshot of where the budget has been, spending versus revenues. You can see the huge amount of deficit spending here in red ink. If we go on to the next slide, what you see is that a major chunk of this is Social Security and Medicare. Somehow we're cutting off the bottom, but there's dates down here, and this is like 2011 or 2012. The major areas of growth have been Social Security, Medicare, health, and defense. If we go to the next slide, when you look at the forecast of this, what's considered mandatory spending are all these categories, including Medicare and Social Security. The discretionary is just a small part of the budget. It's going to be impossible, I think, to balance the budget in this kind of a situation. There's going to have to be some change here, and that's going to be, I think, a bloody war. But just trying to level set by looking at the numbers, what makes up the government budget. And this is a projection out to 2023, I believe. You can either raise the retirement age for Social Security and eligibility age for Medicare, adjust the benefit formula based on income, or raise the payroll tax to try and get that Social Security, Medicare thing back into balance. Given that I'm retired, do I want that? No, but reality is something's got to be done. Okay. You go ahead. Let's talk about the markets. This is data going back to 1954. Shows the 10-year and 3 months, 10-year bonds and 3-month Treasury bills. Back to 1954, we haven't seen interest rates that low. It's amazing for that long period of time. Probably not going to change right away, but eventually these things are going to start to go up. When we think about the international market, this is the current account balance. All this red ink is money going out of the country. A lot of this down in here was for oil. What's happened is that has shrunk, these deficits have shrunk because of cheap natural gas, as well as lower prices for oil. Shale gas that's being developed in this country is a major contributor to this. So let's go on. Looking across the world a little bit, the European debt, they're still digging out. China, Europe is starting to rebound, but it still has its struggles. China is it's growing. It's going to continue to grow. It may not grow at the same pace as it did in the past, and they're going to be going through some of the same types of labor problems that we have in this country of improvements in technology is undermining employment growth in China. The positive thing is that they're building a middle class that may become stronger consumers, which is going to provide a source. Instead of exporting everything, they'll be consumed more internally in China, which will be good for our country and jobs here. Global competition. We had a dramatic increase in the labor supply in the whole world as a result of the opening up of Asia, especially the Soviet Union when it collapsed, but also China and India and other parts of Asia. We really saw a dramatic increase in the labor supply, and as a result, that's one of the reasons why wages have not gone up in this country, because you're running into that global competition for labor. At the same time, we've got an education deficit. Some of the best schools here are not keeping up with schools in other countries. When we go on, gold. A few years ago, I said to somebody, buy gold. I looked pretty smart back then. Out here, I would say, watch interest rates. Because as our interest rates go up, you're going to see the price of gold go down. And, the price of gold could as easily go to 800 as it could go to 2,000. I'm leaning more to the 800 level, and as interest rates start to go up, because what happens is you might think it's a hedge against inflation, but at the same time, the gold prices just won't be sustainable at where they are, because as the economy strengthens, even though interest rates are going up, the price of gold is going to start to come down. Energy. Natural gas and oil. It used to be that oil and natural gas were very closely linked, but here's the impact of shale gas, because gas is priced locally while oil is priced. Whoa! I have a riveting presentation. Anyway, there's a disconnect here because of shale gas. Shale gas has enabled us to see lower prices for natural gas relative to oil. So, what's this all mean? The economy is still trying to accelerate. Housing and autos, as I've said, has made great progress. The periodic political dysfunction continues to create uncertainty. In fact, there are people that bet on this. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but people will either short the market or buy the market based upon what they think is going to happen in Washington. It's just crazy. I hate to think that the economy is driven by government policy. Bottom line, though, is that the government impact is going to diminish over the next 2 years because of elections. So nothing's going to get done in Washington, and that could be a good thing. It's going to reduce uncertainty. At the same time, business balance sheets are very strong. People, businesses are sitting on $1 trillion worth of cash. I think we could see a very strong acceleration of growth led by housing and autos, low interest rates, and cheap energy. Recession is unlikely if we go on. So somehow we're cutting off some numbers, but 2013, 1.9%. Looking for an acceleration to 2.8% for this year. That could be low. Retail sales, employment growth picking up, manufacturing employment, the unemployment rate continuing to slide down. Still relatively low inflation, but you're going to start to see some increase in interest rates.
The 5-month 10-year Treasury, 1.9, 2.3, 2.9.
So, real quick, because I know I'm hitting your end time here. Some of the headwinds are global competition, the political climate, the Middle East, Ukraine. That's a wild card that could really throw a monkey wrench into this. Things that are helping us along are the housing market, cheap energy, manufacturing, new technology development, especially like in nanotechnology, and if we were to get a rebirth of good government. Real quick on locally, we are lagging the nation in economic strength. One of the big issues is lack of population growth. We have one of the slowest rates of growth for population in the country. This is recent data. I don't know that that's real. It'll probably be revised down, is my sense, as far as local employment. If we go on. So that generally we follow the nation, but we're going to be at a slower pace. So we've got a shortage of population in the entrepreneurial age group, 22 to 34. And airport activity has significantly declined, and that's a major problem. We've got to do something about that. So instead of 2.8 for national GDP, I got 2.5 for local, and a bit slower numbers. Some pickup in the housing and non-residential construction. And a couple things to mention is that we do have a relatively low cost of business. If we can get more airlines out at the airport. I can't believe that the Republican National Convention is going to happen in Cincinnati because of our airport. Downtown Fountain Square has been doing well. Strong core businesses, diversity of industry, we're not Detroit, and a consumer research center. We have a significant level of expertise in this area in consumer research because of companies like Procter & Gamble and Dunnhumby and Macy's and Federated. I said Macy's, I should have said Federated. And businesses like that, major benefit to our region. We're like the California of consumer research. And I think that wraps it up. I went a couple minutes long, sorry about that, but if you have any questions, I'll Yes.
You had a great deal of useful information about housing start. What's the picture of foreclosures?
The foreclosures seem to be back in balance. There has been this talk about, though, there's this stock of what are called zombie houses, so to speak, and these are the ones that are vacant and deteriorating. And eventually probably will have to be torn down. But what you're going to see, because as the economy improves and you've got a lot of younger folks that are living with parents, and now they're going to be able to get out on their own. I don't know if any of you have those. You know, this could be a good sign. And so that's going to suck up a lot of the housing and provide more of a demand for new construction. Yes?
There's a ton of discussion these days about significant increase in the minimum wage.
Ah,
What's your view of the impact that would have on hiring?
everything I have read is that it will have overall a minimal impact on total hiring. I didn't used to think that way, but the things that I've read seem to indicate that. There will be some segments that could be negatively affected, generally probably in restaurants. But to me, I think what I'd like to see is to depoliticize that issue and have some, let's say, a panel of experts from either universities or businesses that can get together and say, here's how the minimum wage ought to be dealt with over the long term. You know, it should be going up at least at the rate of inflation. And I just don't think it's something that politicians necessarily can answer effectively. And it becomes such a hot political potato that I don't know if they're going to get to the right answer. That's my opinion.
Just curious as to your, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but your opinion of the minimum wage as an economist, would that be that the government shouldn't be involved because the minimum wage, isn't it just a factor of business? I mean, do you think it should be able to fluctuate or not? You know,
As an economist, I think wages should not be rigid. They should be allowed to adjust,
the market can.
just like every other market. I think the issue really is, I mean, do I like the whole concept of minimum wage? Kind of yes and no. I mean, you got to look at what's going on in this world with wage rates and salaries, and you know, you've this kind of maybe a different position, but you look at some of the CEO type salaries, and there's a lot of discussion about that. What's the right mix, or what's the right relationship of somebody who's pulling in $100 million versus somebody else working at the place that's making $8 an hour? I don't know what the answer to that is. I mean, you look at baseball and football and the salaries that they're making, and I tend to think if that's what the market's willing to pay, that's fine. And for CEOs, if the board of directors are willing to pay that, okay. I mean, it's up to the shareholders to really react if they don't like those salaries. When it comes to the minimum wage, you know, it's kind of like everything else in this country associated with support services. Is there some minimum wage that kind of makes sense? Yes, I think so, and it should at least be growing at the rate of inflation. It's my opinion. Yes?
You mentioned how manufacturing seems to be recovering, and we've kind of seen some of that here just in our neck of the woods with regard regards to the amount of space that's on the market. It seems like there's less light industrial manufacturing space, but we're still seeing kind of a drag in the office, especially the retail markets. How do you see that, kind of moving forward over the next year or so?
Good point. I think there is a disconnect between manufacturing and office and commercial space. Manufacturing, I think, is going to continue to expand. I think you're going to see demand for that, and especially when you look at Hamilton County, there's a lack of space for new manufacturing. When it comes to commercial and retail, the internet is undermining a lot of the retail activity, and that's not going to stop. So I would not expect great demand in the retail market for space. I think you're going to see some, and it'll always be somebody kind of changing over an existing building, but probably not building much new. Now, if we get some, Mayor Cranley has recently announced that he wants to be the most welcome city in the country for immigration. Now, if we do get some uptick in population, this could change. But outside of that, I don't see much locally.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, and in our appreciation of you coming out to speak today, we're going to do one of two things for you, because I'm not sure. So we're going to work out, we'll either give you a Sam's gift card, or we'll give you a new membership with Sam's Club. So if you don't have a membership with Sam's.
We have a membership.
Okay, well then we'll work on it. And I'll get with y'all. So our next meeting will be May,
I don't want to talk
You know
about
what
that,
it is.
Mr. President.
we'll watch your communicator, we'll fix something, it's the second Tuesday.
And we are planning an update on the bridge project, transportation issues. That's what we're looking at.
And also in May, we have an RCP meeting, and that will be held at Raffles. Oh, you're on that.
The Manor House.
Oh, it's at the Manor House, I'm sorry, it's at the Manor House in Springdale, and it is backed by popular demand. Another money talk, I guess you could say, is what is
Thank
Ed Fink with Simply Money. They changed their name, it's to the company's name now is Simply Money, and that is May
The third Wednesday.
third Wednesday in May. Watch your communicator and your emails for that. And if you're not receiving emails, give me or get me a card as you're walking out. And make sure to visit our Sam's Club people, and we will see you next month. Thank you very much.